Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to my Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Thank you. Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 60. I have Aaron Day on here, who is running for president for the Red Gang. He's very much into cryptocurrency. He's also in the free state of New Hampshire. I'm sorry to say, this is the first time I've gotten a free stater on here, so I've certainly tried. But yeah, where you go, living in the free state of New Hampshire, and you've also into cryptocurrency and some other things. How are you doing, Aaron?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me on the show. And I noticed that in the name of the podcast, Fountainhead, I was the CEO of the Atlas Society for a few years. So I don't know if you found that when you were looking at the bio. So.
Yeah, you were. I remember that. The CEO of the Atlas Society. I'd forgotten about that. Yeah. When were you at the Atlas Society?
Like 2012 to 2016 time period. Yeah. So it was during the movies. So I was there when the Atlas Shrugged 2 and Atlas Shrugged 3 came out, and actually was just first introduced to the Atlas Society at the screening of Atlas Shrugged Part 1.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, they're doing some good work there. So you decided to do other things, and I guess Jennifer Grossman's had that job since you left, I believe.
Yep.
Yeah, I was. I first became aware of them back in the '90s when it was called the Institute for Objectivist Studies. There's been a lot. How many people are working for them right now?
I don't know how many were working there. I just jumped in part time, so they were going through a transition period. So I was still running a company. So I was kind of like I was running the Atlas Society halftime, and frankly, I didn't want to move to DC. So I kind of came in at a crucial period and did some work and helped it restructure. And then Jennifer came in full time.
Yeah. I don't know why. This day and age, if I was going to have an organization like that, I'd go where it's as cheap as possible. But anyway. Everybody's got their reasons. Although I would say if you have an organization like that, you probably at least do want to be close to a fairly major airport is the only thing. But yeah, so you can bring people in. But yeah, otherwise.
Well, of course, what I was always lobbying for was that they should move it to New Hampshire because Galt's Gulch is in New Hampshire, and we have the Pork Fest meet up every year.
Yeah.
Up in the mountains, and it looks like Galt's Gulch. I mean, like the background that I have on my green screen here is kind of it's a New Hampshire setting, reminiscent of Galt's Gulch. So
yeah, there's some pretty scenery in New Hampshire. It can be pretty. It can be pretty. I still think it's probably But anyway, Thing is, New Hampshire really doesn't have what I would call a major airport. But anyway,
No, it doesn't.
I think when Fee moved to Atlanta, that wasn't a bad move. I'd probably move if I was having an organization like that. I'd probably move to Orlando because, not to mention, Orlando is also very much a conference hub. But anyway, it's up to you. That's not irrelevant. So how did you get into Ayn Rand, and how did you get into the Free State Project and some of this other stuff?
I mean, I got into Ayn Rand when I was 15, 16 years old, and I think typical introduced to Anthem by someone in high school, and then read Anthem, and then gradually started reading all the books, and then read all of it in high school, and was very inspired by it. And in fact, I went to Duke for only for a year. I ended up dropping out of Duke to start my first company. So I was very influenced by Rand and kind of the whole notion of individualism and capitalism and starting my own thing. So I started a tech company when I was 19, when I dropped out of college, and recruited 6 people that went to high school with me to get involved in that venture. So that's how it started. And I had even started an Objectivist club in high school, and some of the people that I started my first company with were also in that Objectivist club. So it was pretty ingrained at an influential time.
Where was that?
Where was what? The startup?
High school, yeah. Where you?
Oh, the high school. I went to the Indiana Academy for Science, Mathematics, and Humanities. It's interesting. It's a public school, but you go there for your last 2 years, for your junior and senior year of high school. It's on a residential. It's on a campus. It's on the Ball State University campus, and so you actually go there your junior and senior year.
Yeah.
So it was a really cool experience, actually. to be able to do that and to, kind of flee the small town that I was in, and then to be able to be around a bunch of other gifted people in a, residential setting is definitely a big life shift.
Small town Indiana you were in?
Yeah. Noblesville, Indiana. Yeah. Nobody's heard of it.
I think I actually have heard of it. Some cool, some interesting people have come out of small towns in Indiana, though, mainly Larry Bird, but yeah. So
French Lick, I believe.
Yeah, French Lick. Yeah, I know a guy named Gary Hoover who came from Muncie. You know who that? He founded the company Hoover's. He's actually one of the richer men in Austin. But yeah, he sold his company out to Dun & Bradstreet. He also founded a company before that called Bookstop, which was really one of the first book superstores that Barnes & Noble bought them out and eventually copied their model. But yeah, so that was how you. So were you at Duke? Richard Salzman's at Duke. Was Salzman at Duke back then, or?
I don't know. I was there in 94. So that was my 94, 95.
Okay. Yeah. That was a very, the go-go 90s. I wish I'd started a company back then. I can only imagine what would have happened, but I was more focused on writing. What was your company doing?
I was an e-commerce company. I think we incorporated a week before Amazon, and we actually started it started out as a shopping mall, but I figured out that you could actually create a bunch of e-commerce stores without having to warehouse or hold any of the inventory. So we set up relationships with wholesale distributors that would drop ship the products to the customers. And then we actually created 22 different storefronts that had 3.5 million different products, ranging from books to consumer electronics to everything like that.
Oh, wow. How far did that go? Did you eventually get bought out by somebody else, or?
Yeah, I sold it in 2001. I didn't peak I didn't get the timing exactly right. We were on the cusp of going public, and then we sold it in 2001. But it was, I was 19 at the time, so that was rare. Now it's not as rare to have really young startup CEOs. It was very rare.
Yeah,
in 1995.
I am always impressed at the amount of at the way objectivists back in the 90s were so embracing the internet. I went to their seminar, the Institute for Objectivist Studies, and it was called that back then in 95 at Wisconsin, the university there. And I was like, wow, look at all these people who got email. I got to get email. That was how I remember how I left that conference, because, and once you get on email, you have no interest in snail mail. Just completely lost interest in that. But yeah, so you were doing drop shipping really way ahead of your time. It was quite impressive.
Again, we incorporated before. So I'll tell you how early we were. Yeah. I recruited my math professor, my number theory professor from Duke, to come down to help us figure out how to encrypt credit cards, because at the time there wasn't a readily available commercial product for being able to encrypt credit card information over the internet. So that's how early this was. So yeah, no, it was completely wild. And it's one of those things where it is still probably the most productive time period of my life, because you have like 6 or 7, there were 7 of us living in a 1-bedroom apartment. It was like crazy. And our first office was in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So we had, so we would have people working, with no AC on July the 4th. Right. A bunch of like nerds working in the back, coding, creating all these websites, doing a whole bunch of stuff for marketing. And we didn't know all of the rules and constraints and things that we weren't supposed to do. So we just did it. And it was very liberating. It was a phenomenal experience. And we've lost the ability to do that. The environment has become so regulated across the board, depending on which industry you're in, or securities laws or anything else. Like it's amazing. I helped my 10-year-old daughter a couple of years ago start a business, a slime business of all things, selling customized slime on TikTok. And it's amazing how much regulation. She wanted to branch out into other categories. Like, well, what if I did like perfume? She was like trying to look into different things, and we looked at all the regulations. Like, no, you can't do this. You have to go through this. You have to go through this. You have to go through this. It's good, because now she knows all of that. Now she knows what we're up against. Her business was successful. She actually made a few $1,000s selling slime on TikTok, learn how inventory worked, learn how marketing worked. I kept on trying to tell her, don't do a business where you have to inventory products, but she wanted to do it anyway, because she wanted the experience of actually making the product. So that's how that worked.
That's really wild. Were you in 94? You would have still been on. Were you still on dial-up at the time? I don't think you were able to get broadband unless you were on a campus somewhere.
Well, so we actually got a T1 line. Is my mic a little better now?
Yeah, you sound good. Yeah.
Just trying to adjust. Okay. We actually got one of the first T1 lines in Fort Lauderdale. I remember we brought in MCI, and it was crazy. We were paying $2,500 a month.
Oh yeah.
For a T1 line, and it was like 1 megabit per second download time. Like you compare it now to what you have through Comcast or even on your phone. It was ridiculous, and it was $2,500 a month. All of the setup cost, it took months to get it installed. I remember we were running cables through the walls, these, making our own Cat5 cables, and it was crazy. So that was very early in the process. I mean, it was so early. I remember when I was raising money, we put together brochures to explain to people why people would shop on the internet, that you could shop 24 hours a day, that it was secure, that, on and on and on. Like when you think about it now, since it's so pervasive, the idea that you would actually have to explain to people, because people would say no one will ever buy anything through a computer. Right. I mean, I had that level of resistance. And so it was crazy.
It's interesting thing too, because you were also dealing at a time when credit card information was sent over phone lines. And I don't think there was any encryption, just because phone lines did not have the bandwidth. I mean, it was, modems have been around since the 50s, but you were still working on modem connections that were probably 14.4 or 28 at 14.4 at the best, or maybe even less than that, just sending all. And now all the credit cards are encrypted. It's so wild, because I remember working with credit cards back then. But yeah, so where'd you go? Where'd you go after that?
So after that, I got involved with venture. I went to the evil side for a short period of time. I got involved with venture capital, which was kind of a weird thing. So I basically got involved with a firm called Industry Ventures, and they're now a $3 billion firm. But I was there when we did their first deal of basically buying out distressed venture funds, and like corporate venture funds. So imagine during the 90s, you had everybody decided to get into investing. When you basically had all these large corporations saying, hey, wait, all these VCs are making billions of dollars. We have all of this money in our balance sheet, so let's get into it. So the first deal that I did for Industry Ventures, well, actually the one deal that I did, it was we bought EDS Ventures. So I know EDS down your way, Plano, Texas.
Yes, Ross Perot's company.
Ross Perot's company had gotten into the venture capital business, and it turns out that wasn't their strong suit. So we went in and bought, I don't even remember what it was, a couple $100 million worth of their investments for like $10 million or $7 million or something like that, and then continued to manage the investments moving forward. And now Industry Ventures is doing that. They have $3 billion under management, and they're still buying out other funds as well as making their own investments. So I did that for a short period of time, like a year or two, and then I started another business, which was in the healthcare sector. And this was, I've struggled with my weight on and off during the years. And I, created a company that helped corporations improve their healthcare costs by reducing obesity within the corporate setting. And we did that by using an incentive-based program. We rewarded people for losing weight at an individual level and a team level. And because if you look at it, 10% of healthcare costs are actually related to obesity. And then if you look at absenteeism and the other impacts, it's like one of the largest cost items for corporations. So I designed the system. We created these incentives where we rewarded people. The more you lose, the longer you kept it off, the more you would earn in financial incentives. And those incentives were tied to actuarial models that we had related to the cost reduction for the employer. So we actually created a scenario where the employees earned money for improving their health, the employer saved money, and we made money. It was a good. This was not a complicated business model. I mean, unlike my first business model, it had a lot of moving parts. I wanted to do something that was simple, more focused, and also more impactful. And so the company was successful. We were rolled out in 43 states. We started to get Fortune 500 companies involved. We had our average client would see 60% employee participation in the program. We had clients that were reducing their healthcare costs by 10%. The ROI numbers were incredible. And then the company was destroyed by Obamacare, Dodd-Frank, and then in a weird way, Attorney General Eric Holder. Obamacare basically changed the rules. So whereas we were rewarding people for their measured improvement in weight, because the whole program was based on actually solving the problem, they said, well, you can't use insurance money in this way. You can only reward people for trying. Basically, you can only reward people for participation in a program. So you can reward somebody for going to the gym, but you can't reward somebody for the outcome of their activities at a gym, kind of, or, and so in our case, we couldn't actually tie the financial incentive. Well, that ruined our business.
So it's like these people who buy gym memberships, but then never go.
Yeah.
I mean, that's which you hear that, but they're locked into this contract where they're paying for a year. Yeah, it's rather unfortunate. That's very interesting. It's so you've really done some amazing stuff. I'm quite impressed. I didn't know that much about you, but this comes to the big question, Aaron. It doesn't sound like you were ever at Silicon Valley, but what has happened to big tech? And you were in the go-go 90s like I was. I imagine it's just absolutely heartbreaking for you to watch this.
I've written a long article about this.
Yeah.
On Medium, and I wrote it in 2018, and it's why venture capital will destroy blockchain technology.
Yeah.
And I outline, because what you just said to me is something that bothered me for a long time. I'm like, why? I had some assumption, and maybe it's just because I was a small L libertarian, because I was an objectivist.
Yeah.
I started this company. I had some notion that venture capital was somehow libertarian. I used to think Bill Gates was a libertarian. There was a point in time where I actually thought Bill Gates wasn't what he's turned out to be.
Well,
and what I figured out is it's really interesting. If you look at it, California used to be a red state in the 80s. I mean, you had Reagan as a governor. The Silicon Valley of the 1980s, the Silicon Valley that was investing in companies like Intel and Apple, like that vintage, those folks were more liberty oriented, and some of them are still out there. They're in the minority. But what happened was, and a lot of people don't know this, most of the money that goes to venture capitalists, people find the whole venture capital process mysterious. And they try to make it like, oh, we're these like really smart people, and like we're these shrewd capitalists. The reality is over 50% of venture capital money comes from public teacher pension funds or public university endowments. Over half of the money that they're spending is derived from taxpayers in one way or another. So essentially, these VCs are just middlemen, kind of brokering. So you end up with, and so then you ask yourself, well, why are all these tech companies in California? The largest investor in venture capital funds is the California Teachers Pension System.
Yeah, then that's probably huge. Yeah.
And what you can imagine that they do, you wouldn't think a public teachers fund would make woke investment requirements like, we're only going to invest in venture firms that invest in companies in California. They would never do that, would they? Of course they did. So literally you have VCs whose money comes from these public sources that are actually, as a precondition for getting the money, they actually have to invest in certain industries and in certain geographies. And so this is how this whole woke thing has come about. So I've been anti-VC. I played in that area for a very short period of time. I've been anti-VC for a long time. I've been trying to tell people they're really venture socialists. It's disheartening. And that's part of, my getting into crypto is a whole other different scenario, but the whole decentralization aspect of crypto, it was very appealing to me. And in particular, some of the areas that I've focused on in crypto are around helping companies raise capital outside of institutions, and being able to do legitimate token offerings where you can get investors legally in your company without all of the middlemen process that goes on with Silicon Valley. So that's been a real area of interest for me.
True. And of course, the largest labor union in America is the National Education Association. I mean, it's the teachers union. So I'm also going to assume that that's probably the largest labor union in every state.
Probably. I
Also,
haven't.
Derek Bros, he talks a lot about InQtel. I mean, literally, where the feds are actually, getting into venture capitalism themselves. That's InQtel.
Yeah, no, that's the CIA. That's the CIA's venture capital arm. Yeah, no, they're directly in it.
And we all know who's involved with a lot of this stuff. Of course, is the so-called rebel named Peter Thiel.
Yep.
I mean, they're all.
And that's turned out to be disappointing. And you look at Palantir and all of these other companies that are beyond intrusive. It's frustrating because for me, I guess I had this view of myself that was inaccurate, or a view of entrepreneurship, which was that it was this thing that Rand wrote about. It's about individualism. It's about creating, and this assumption that the venture capital community and that tech was about innovation. The idea that it ends up being a tool for state censorship, and really pushing social policy and social engineering is beyond tragic.
Yeah, years ago, this was written more by a religious guy named Sam Blumenfeld, but he wrote a book called NEA Trojan Horse in American Education, and it's interesting just to see where the Trojan horse is going. I mean, and of course I think, but I never realized this. I was never aware of this connection between the teachers unions and Silicon Valley and all this stuff. It's wild.
It is. That's one of my favorite books that you mentioned, though. I love that book. I have recommended that book. I'm actually writing a second book right now, which is I'm looking at the history of propaganda as it relates to public health, education, mainstream media, and technology and big tech. It's actually the intersection of all of those areas. And Blumenfeld's book is like one of my go-to sources, because there aren't many people that talk about the history of education. For me, it's like, I always want to look back. What's the source of this? Where did this come from? And nobody knows. That the Blumenfeld book is just eye-opening.
Yeah, that was a good book. Yeah, it was I mean, he sometimes errs too much on the religious right side, but there is some good stuff there. It's I'm glad to hear you have an open mind about that. Because I had Lars Mapstead on a couple days ago, and he actually started that site Adult Friend Finder. He's running for president LP, and we talked about that too, but he didn't know about this. I definitely have to share this video with Lars. I think he'll find it interesting. So obviously you were always more involved with the David Kelly wing of Objectivism, I guess, since you worked for his organization.
I was, but again, I'd say it's a short. So my company was destroyed. It was funny. The first talk I ever gave at an Atlas Society event happened the same day that the Supreme Court handed down the ruling holding up Obamacare. So I remember I'm in the hotel room working on my speech, working on my slides to introduce myself to the folks at the Atlas Society, and I had to incorporate that because that was like the death knell. That was like the final nail in my company, and so that was my opening. So again, I was with the Atlas Society for 4 years. I'm not involved with like the drama between the Ayn Rand Institute and any of that other stuff. I spent 4 years with the Atlas Society, and I'm not jumping in one way or the other in kind of any of the drama.
David Kelly's has done a lot of good work there, and they've done a lot of good work there too. And they've had
I agree. Yep, I agree.
And I've got to tip my hat also to Don Heath back in the 90s. I mean, he did all the office work, and he all the work that wasn't glamorous that helped build that organization too. But there have been a lot of good people there. That's one thing I've noticed about people into Rand. Some of the best people are into Rand. They'll give you their best effort. They'll always show up on time. They're always they really can show a lot of professionalism. But but you were in Florida, and so when did you go up to New Hampshire?
Well, I started my company in Florida, and then I moved. The co-founder was at MIT at the time, so I actually moved it up to the Boston area. So my first company was in Boston, and then when I started my second company, it was in Boston as well. So I was in Boston, and then eventually I got married, and once the financial collapse happened in 2008, Boston was actually looking pretty dicey. I remember we'd walk down Washington Street there, and there were a lot of just vacant buildings that had been demolished, and actually the crime was starting to pick up. And so we were looking to have start a family, and Boston was not where we wanted to be. So I had researched and stumbled across the Free State Project, and came up to New Hampshire, visited. It's not like it was a huge move. I mean, we're only moving 45 minutes, 50 minutes away, but checked it out and did our research, spent a year trying to figure out exactly where in New Hampshire we wanted to move, and then moved up in 2009. So I was working, I still had my company, was still working through all the regulatory issues, and then working with the Atlas Society at the same time. And then we had twins in 2010.
Oh, twins, identical or fraternal?
Fraternal. So and they are different. It's fascinating to see.
So you got how many kids now?
2.
Okay. Yeah. So that's good to know. Yeah. It's always nice to see people who are, we need more people who are into Ayn Rand having kids. I think that's one of the major weaknesses with Rand, was just not appreciating the importance of family, but that's good to know. Yeah. So you'd say you're in New Hampshire now. Yeah. What do you think about the whole progress of the Free State Project right now? I mean, do you think it's doing pretty well, or?
I think it's doing pretty well. I mean, I kind of, I took some time off. It's kind of a long story, but I was actually the chair of the Free State Project for a few years as well. So I kind of took on a whole bunch at one time. And I was the chair when we hit the trigger the move number. So we got, the whole point is to get 20,000 people to move to, and we hit, I think in February 2016, we finally hit 20,000 signers. And so I don't even know what the current stats are, but people have been moving. I mean, I think that there's no doubt that, I mean, it's like anything that's pro-liberty. Everybody has different opinions. There's not, however many free staters there are, that's how many different flavors of liberty you have. And that's, you wouldn't expect it to be any other way, but it seems to have grown substantially, and a lot of that coming off of the COVID tyranny. A lot of people looking at wherever their state was, and depending upon how bad the lockdowns were and everything else. My understanding was that PorcFest last year had 3,000 attendees. It was sold out.
Yep.
And these are mostly new people. And so one thing that you're saying, back to your previous point about having families and kids, there are a lot of free staters having kids. That's a change in the last 5 years, but there really has been a baby boom here. So even when you go to a PorcFest event, you'll see a lot of kids hanging out as well. So I think it's definitely gaining traction, and there are a lot of free staters involved in state government. I don't know how many, 30, 40, maybe or so, elected to the state House of Representatives, and one in the state Senate. So definitely an outsized impact based on the number of people that are in the Free State Project itself.
Dennis Pratt always talks about how kids will go to PorcFest. Maybe they'll be 10 or 11, and they'll get all these little jobs, and they'll end up making what for that age is a lot of money at PorcFest. They'll make money doing little jobs for people. He said it's a bonanza for kids that age. It seems like a really great event. Also, I've only been to PorcFest once, but I do recommend. PorcFest is in the last week of June. Make all of your plans before Christmas. The hotels fill up, the Airbnb. I mean, the hotels fill up, all that stuff. Just 6 months out. That's what you can always cancel if you change your plans, but sooner than later with
that is absolutely true.
Fest.
Yep.
Because it's sometimes it seems like the area is not necessarily ready to handle that. I stayed in an Airbnb, and it was also the first time I got a car on Turo. It was when I went up there. I got a Turo in Boston and just drove up. But so PorcFest, that's one thing. You can fly to. You can't really fly to PorcFest. You gotta figure out a way to get there. You can either, Manchester's the closest airport, but Boston's an hour further, and they have a lot more flying options. Okay, definitely. So PorcFest, and also there's the Liberty Forum in March, which is also a good event. It's a little more formal if you don't want to go camp out. It's a nice event to go to as well. So
Yep.
So this brings us also to what happened to ARI in 2020. Do you have any opinions on that? Because ARI seems to really it seems like they're trying to pretend they didn't happen. It seems like they bought into a lot of that COVID nonsense in 2020.
I've got to be honest with you. I haven't followed it, and I don't know. So
Okay.
I don't
Yeah.
like. I'm completely out of it. I
Yeah.
separated from all of this stuff. It's kind of it's a long story. I got into politics. I ran for U.S. Senate in 2016 for a very specific purpose. My purpose was. I'll try to summarize this quickly so it's not overly. It's not that complex, but basically, Kelly Ayotte interfered with our state elections, and I was trying to stop Obamacare Medicaid expansion in New Hampshire. And Kelly Ayotte got involved, helped determine the outcome of the Speaker of the House in the state of New Hampshire, which ultimately led to passing Obamacare Medicaid expansion. And I said, listen. Because, if you talk to a lot of people in the Free State Project, they'll say, well, who cares about DC? We should just focus on New Hampshire. The problem is New Hampshire's run from the top down. All of the money and all the influence comes from the top down. So for all of the efforts to try to change things from the bottom up at the state house level, everything is coming from the top down. So I said, hey, listen, if you guys are going to basically extend Obamacare in New Hampshire just so that Kelly Ayotte can get elected, then I'll run as an independent. And I'll cost her that seat. And that's exactly what I did. I got 17,000 votes. Ayotte lost by 1,700 votes. And even at the time, there was a Breitbart article. I said, look, if you do this, I'll cost her the seat and it will cost the Republicans control of the United States Senate. And eventually it did, because in 2020, so I did that. It's a long part of the process. I ended up getting involved in $280 million worth of lawsuits. I was a defendant in a bunch of litigation for 5 years. It took 5 years to resolve, and it did finally resolve. But I basically went off the map for a while and focused on resolving the lawsuits, focusing on myself, spending time with my family, because all that political stuff that I was doing, my kids were like, 2 to 7 years old. So as they were getting older, I wasn't able to run 5 organizations at the same time and actually spend time with my kids. So I've actually been on a bit of a break from all of this stuff. So I don't know what's going on with the Atlas Society. I don't know what's going on with ARI. I haven't been to Porkfest in 5 or 6 years. So I'm, so of course, what am I going to do? I'll just get back in the game by running for president, and then we'll see how that goes.
You ran as so Kelly Ayotte. That's Ayotte, if you want to look that up. So you ran as an independent, but there was also a libertarian running in that election. So
there was.
I guess it looks like you're not really involved with the LP for whatever reasons, or what are.
So I was. In 2013, I was the chair of the Republican Liberty Caucus in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
So I was on board with the idea that the best way to politically impact liberty was through the Republican Party. I've been a libertarian. I mean, I'm a small L libertarian. I'm still a small L libertarian.
I understand. Small L libertarian, ideological libertarian. Some people who don't want to use the word say voluntarist, which I think is a good word. But yes, I understand. Yes, small L libertarian. Yeah.
And so So I was my activities had been primarily in the Republican Party. I actually ran for governor as a libertarian in 2018. But all of my activities, and the candidate that they had at the time was, I would classify more as a left libertarian. And so the truth is, I thought, given what my objective was with respect to Ayotte, I thought it was important that I be on the ballot because of my activities in trying to stop Obamacare Medicaid expansion in New Hampshire. There were a lot of people that knew who I was, and particularly Republicans, which is how I was able to get 17,000 votes. And this is why it's interesting. It was a 4-way race, and I got more votes than the Libertarian candidate. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I think I've gotten more votes in a statewide race than any Free Stater ever. I think that still holds. So that was interesting in a 4-way race, but man, that was that was intense. There were a lot of people that were upset about that. It still are.
That's very interesting. So you also were an early adopter with Bitcoin.
I was introduced to Bitcoin through, once again, the Free State Project. So the Free State Project really, the political part, I don't even know if it's the least exciting at this point, but I learned about Bitcoin through a radio show called Free Talk Live.
Yeah.
Hosted by Ian Freeman and Mark Edge. In fact, I learned about Free Talk Live when I was still in Boston. It's one of the things that helped motivate me to move up to New Hampshire. I would go to the gym and I'd actually listen to Free Talk Live. So I was introduced to this in 2012. And I remember being at a Liberty Forum in 2013 and buying $1 worth of Bitcoin at one of the first Bitcoin ATMs. And then I used Bitcoin. I formed a super PAC in 2014 and accepted Bitcoin. I think I raised like 20 Bitcoin or something like that in 2014 to help political candidates. And we actually used cryptocurrency to pay campaign staff. We'd run contests for, who could put up the most yard signs or whatever. And we'd actually compensate people using cryptocurrency. And in fact, I got, after the 2016 election and all of the stuff that happened in the lawsuits, I'd given up on politics. And in many respects, I still have, which is somewhat inconsistent with running for president, but it does make sense once you hear why I'm running and how I'm running. But I got to the point where it's like, okay, listen, you really, what's the difference between the Republicans and the Democrats? And at this point, the deep state is so entrenched. Like the idea of having checks and balances and gridlock is great if you actually have a constitutionally limited form of government. We no longer have a constitutionally limited form of government. Yeah. So now if you get in there, now the gridlock just means you can't fix all of the stuff, this gradual creep away from the Constitution. You can't fix any of it because the minute you're in there, you're 2 years in, there's another congressional election cycle. There's all this gridlock. You really can't fix things. It's kind of like, well, if you ask me, what is your view on education? I'd love to get rid of the Department of Education. It's not going to happen realistically, because you need Congress, and Congress is going to be gridlocked. There's not going to be a wave sufficient enough to end the Department of Education. So I could say that that's what I want to do. I can't actually do it. What should people do? You should pull your kids out of public school. That is an activism project that works. Trying to fix this from the inside isn't really workable anymore. So I actually got completely out of politics, and I moved 100% into cryptocurrency. I've been living off of cryptocurrency since 2019. And because my belief was that the dollar is going to collapse. We're entering a new phase, and decentralization and separation of money and state, to me, is one of the most pro-freedom things I could imagine. And so that was kind of my approach. I'm like, I'm not going to do politics anymore. Instead, I'm going to promote separation of money and state and some of the other things that you can do with blockchain technology in other areas. I got really excited about the work of what Patrick Byrne was doing. And I don't know if you followed this, but Patrick Byrne was the CEO of Overstock.com. He was the first major retailer to take Bitcoin, and he is a huge Liberty guy. I think he was Milton Friedman appointed him the chair of the Milton Friedman, whatever his group is on school choice. Like Patrick Byrne is really, I think he has a PhD in political science from Stanford. He's like, he is pretty hardcore. And his idea was he was going to shift Overstock from being an online retailer to completely being a blockchain company. And his vision was to create a blockchain tech stack for human civilization. So his view was you could use this blockchain technology to decentralize everything from money to capital markets. So in other words, I mean, if you knew how stocks actually work right now, there's actually one company in the United States that physically holds on and owns all of the stock certificates of all the publicly traded corporations. And they move it around in like filing cabinets. It takes 3 days to settle stock. It's an absurd process. It's like you could use blockchain technology to have a ledger where you could actually record in real time stock sales, stocks, bonds, all of capital markets. You could do voting on the blockchain. So he went out to build this whole set of companies that would basically fix inefficiencies everywhere where you have a corrupt third party, where somebody's controlling a physical database that they can manipulate. You could put a blockchain in there, and you could add some transparency and some efficiency to the process. And that was his vision. And I got involved in that with a blockchain called Ravencoin, which really is something that Ravencoin is for tokenizing assets of any kind. So whether you're tokenizing wine or stocks or anything that you want to tokenize and make available for sale, Ravencoin was essentially that. So I've been working on that for really kind of promoting myself, not paid to do this, but working on getting projects going on the Ravencoin blockchain, because I feel like the disintermediation through technology is a better approach than voting, because I didn't think that voting was where it was at. Then what I found, unfortunately, was, and this really woke me up in the last year or so, the government is going after crypto and they're trying to shut it down as quickly as they can. And in fact, just in the 90 days, as I've been writing this book, The Final Countdown, Crypto, Gold, Silver, and the People's Last Stand Against Tyranny by Central Bank Digital Currency, as I was writing that book and researching the book, just the developments that have gone on in the last 90 days, the government is using everything from the IRS to the SEC to the Treasury to the White House putting out executive orders. They are clamping down on crypto. So I got back involved first and foremost to stop not just the collapse of decentralized crypto, but the worst version of this, which is central bank digital currency, which is what they're going to implement next, which is what is being rolled out globally, which is basically digital centralized censorable money that the government will have complete control over. And they'll be able to tie that to social credit scores. So if the government doesn't like your behavior, they can cut off access to your money. And the developments in that area are at a lightning pace. So I wanted to get out in my campaign for president. The first and the most important thing is to stop CBDC. And the way to stop CBDC is actually to get people to move into self-custody, crypto, gold, and silver now. Like, you're not going to stop it from a regulatory perspective. You have to stop it by people moving their money into alternative decentralized systems.
As you said, the bank run. And, some people in the crypto scene have talked about Ron DeSantis and his bill. Allegedly, you've said that bill's not effective. He's not really doing anything to fight central bank digital currency, although it seems like he's doing theater.
He's doing theater, but it's not a ban of central bank digital currencies. What it is it changes the universal commercial code rules that basically means that if they implement a CBDC, there won't be any consumer protection. So in other words, right now there's a whole series of codes where if somebody fraudulently charges your credit card or whatever, there's a whole set of rules for how you can get your money back. And there's a whole code that governs what you can do with money, what you can't do with money, and what your avenues are for restitution if there's fraud or whatever. Well, that universal commercial code doesn't apply to crypto today, right? So if I'm in Florida right now and I'm buying something with Bitcoin, I don't have the UCC codes either. And so all they're saying is if they implement CBDC, there will be no consumer protection. Okay, that's not a ban on CBDC. And chances are if they roll out a CBDC, well, what's going to happen? Well, the CBDC, and now who's disadvantaged by this? The consumer. Well, what do you think is going to happen? You think the legislator is going to say, well, we're just going to keep it for I mean, it's a joke. It's actually just a complete piece of show legislation. And what alarmed me in writing this book was they've already done 3 CBDC pilots in the United States. They conducted a pilot for CBDC between 2020 and 2022. It was the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston in conjunction with MIT. They successfully were able to get the CBDC to handle 1.7 million transactions per second. And to put this into perspective, the current traditional financial system handles 150,000 transactions per second. So they've done a CBDC that handles 1.7 million transactions per second, meaning they have an alternative if they need it that already works technically. And at the conclusion of the pilot, it says, well, we've worked through some of these technical details, but we still need to figure out the legality of how we would implement this, and we would still need to figure out how to sell it to the public. But what that says to me is when there's an emergency, they have the technology on the shelf. They'll use an emergency to bring it in. But the technology is there. The technology is literally on the shelf. Then they did another pilot for banks using CBDCs amongst themselves. So it's all wholesale CBDC. And then there's a third pilot, which is basically, the way I view it, is it's a rule set that would allow different CBDCs to interact with each other, and then it even adds digital assets. So it makes it so they regulate everything, and you could end up in a situation where if the point of something like Bitcoin is to have decentralized currency, and the point of something like Ravencoin is to be able to digitize assets and do peer-to-peer commerce without middlemen, this regulatory liability network, as it's called, is the opposite of that. This is something where you will have one or more third parties who will have the ability to censor, block, and stop and freeze transactions. So you could have a situation where, you know, if Ravencoin, you had digital tokens and people were trading stocks through that, no one can block it. In this case, both the Federal Reserve and a company called DTCC, who is the company that currently handles all of the stock certificates for public traded companies, both of them would have control over your digital tokens that represent stock certificates. So that all three of these pilots have been conducted. So in July, FedNow is being launched, which basically will be an instant payment system. So right now, you know, when you deposit a check, it can take 7 to 10 days to clear. You send a wire, it may take a day. You do ACH, it takes 1 to 3 days. It's expensive. Starting in July, it's going to be instant, and it's going to cost a fraction of a cent. That is not itself CBDC, but what it is an infrastructure. It's the rails, and CBDC is the train that can run on the FedNow rails. So this stuff is here. And so I'm looking at this like, you know, so I've been in crypto for over a decade. The guy who introduced me, Ian Freeman, who introduced me to Bitcoin, is going to jail.
Yes, Crypto 6.
Crypto 6, which is ridiculous. Which I mean, you know, of course they write it up. It's like, oh well, he wasn't a money transmitter, he wasn't a licensed money transmitter. It's money laundering, and it's all this other stuff.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's, you know, people were buying Bitcoin for cash. Yeah. I mean, this was a clear-cut voluntary transaction. There were not actually here. This was a lot of trumped-up, absolute garbage. And so, people should be fearful about, very fearful of this. If somebody like Ian, because I've known Ian for a while, and again, Free Talk Live, this is somebody who's very principled, very libertarian, very much nonviolent and promoting voluntary exchange. If he's going to jail, or another free stater, Jeremy Kauffman, who started Library, which is also known as Odyssey. So it's basically a decentralized version of YouTube that you can't censor and take down. Well, the SEC went after him, spent 5 years, drained all of their resources. Basically, you know, I don't know if they're out of business. They don't have any employees right now. The service is still up. They made an example of him. So these people that are heroes and pioneers in blockchain technology, doing things like enabling voluntary trade, like what Ian was doing, or enabling free speech, like what Ian was facilitating voluntary exchange, and Jeremy was facilitating free speech. The people have had their business stripped, and Ian's case facing jail time. That's unacceptable. Like that's horrifying.
Aria DeMezzo is also going to jail too. She's part of the Crypto 6. You know, Aaron, I love the Free State Project and you know, I do know, but you know, also, what about doing what Roger Ver did? I mean, he renounced his citizenship, and maybe that's what crypto has to do. I mean, just take your crypto projects out of America, and then you don't have to worry about complying with any of this.
Well, I mean, we'll see how that works out. So the problem is at some point, once you see what they're trying to implement, it is a global. There's a globalist agenda here that moves towards more centralization.
Yeah,
you really do have this UN Agenda 2030 and all these sustainable development goals that will tie into a social credit system, that will tie into digital currency. So it actually needs to be stopped, because this is one of those things where I think Roger spends his time in Japan and St. Kitts or something like that. But I mean, Japan's not going to be immune to this. I mean, at some point, this needs to be stopped, because they're not going to allow it to be 99% absolute tyranny and then 1% freedom, right? If their thing continues to gain steam, they're going to kill and confiscate whatever the other 1% have left. So it can be stopped. That's why I'm promoting this bank run concept, because there's the financial system is the weakest it's ever been. Like truly the banking system. When I wrote the book, that was the most interesting thing, because if I talk to somebody that doesn't know much about finance or the history of the dollar, their assumption is just since 1920, the dollar's been the global reserve currency. So in other words, for almost everyone's lives that's currently on the planet, the dollar has been the global reserve currency, and they've never questioned whether it could ever fail. It's not something people have even considered. You'd never even consider it. It's, oh, this is just the dollar. This is it. This is the standard. This is the currency. Until you study the history and you realize there have been thousands of fiat currencies.
Yes.
Not a single one has succeeded. They've all failed.
They all failed.
Every one. A guy wrote a book about it. He analyzed 775 of them. The average fiat currency lasts 27 years. Even when you look at global reserve currencies, okay, before the dollar was the British pound, before that was the French franc, before that was Spain, and then before that was Portugal. And the average global reserve currency lasts about 100 years. We've been the global reserve currency for about 103 years. Yeah. We flash every warning indicator for a failing fiat currency.
Yes.
We abandoned the gold standard, and then we have fractional reserve banking, where banks are supposed to have 10% of customer deposits on reserve. So, obviously bank runs would be pretty easy because the banks only have 10% of the depositors' funds. They got rid of the 10% reserve requirement as part of COVID. I mean, our banks are, you mentioned to me a lot of cryptos are scams. Yeah, most of cryptos are scams, but none of them can compare to the size and the sheer I don't know, the size of the Ponzi and the size of the deception of the US dollar and fiat currency at this point in time. And you now have foreign countries, the BRICS, are exiting the dollar as quickly as they can. It used to be that 72% of international trade was conducted using the US dollar. It's now 48%. So literally, this is the time to stop it, because we know they have CBDCs ready. We know where they want to go. This is the time to extract from that. And it doesn't take 50% of the population to do this. If 3% of the people do this, then it's over. So that to me is the biggest activism project, having run the Atlas Society and been involved in politics and everything else. The single biggest, most impactful activism project I've ever seen is a bank run where you exchange your fiat currency for self-custody, crypto, gold, and silver. And I don't care, people want to immediately get into the arguments over which kind of crypto and, well, what happens if the grid goes down and all that other stuff. This is why I say crypto, gold, and silver. And in the book, I outline, how to do that. And I give kind of recommendations about which cryptos and even how to do self-custody. I'm not here shilling any particular coin. I'm shilling a particular kind of coin. They have to be proof of work coins. They have to be coins that aren't run by centralized organizations, that use proof of work, meaning that there are computers competing to solve math problems, to add transactions to the database. So that way you don't have to worry about centralization, so on and so forth. But it's more about the conceptually what types of coins make sense. And we've had 12 straight weeks of people pulling money out of the banks. We have I believe the lowest supply of actual physical cash, M2, since 1929. Like right now, like the headwinds, this is serious. This is is very, very serious. So this is possible. And hopefully I'm going to be speaking at PorkFest about my book. That's what I'm hoping to be able to do, is present this book and present this concept to that audience, because this has to resonate with that audience, because this is the audience where I learned about crypto. This is the audience where people have been persecuted. And this is the audience where, we've tried to engage in the political process and know what the effect of that has been.
Yes. This is not tax advice. This is not legal advice. This is not financial advice, just to put that out there.
Right now. Absolutely.
Yeah. So this is interesting to see where crypto is going up. What do you, I had Doug Tuman on here once, who runs Monerotopia. What do you think about Monero?
I include Monero and Zcash in there as well. So I had those proof of work coins, and then I actually have a little section on privacy coins. I think Monero and Zcash are something people should consider consider as well.
Well, yeah.
Now,
I
I've been
think,
living off of crypto since 2019. So realistically, I use Bitcoin Cash has been the most effective to use as cash. So if I actually have to pay bills and do things, I use mostly Bitcoin Cash. BTC is too expensive for transaction fees. Ravencoin has been okay. Litecoin has been okay. And I like BSV. I think I tagged Craig Wright in one of your responses.
yes.
And that he is very controversial, probably. Whenever I bring up BSV, there are certain people that'll just block me for bringing up BSV, but I have spent hundreds of hours watching his videos and reading his stuff. And, if he's not Satoshi, he magically happens to know more about how it works and how it scales than anyone. So I think I can say that with certainty. I don't necessarily even like his approach with these lawsuits, but having been around a lot of objectivists, he's an objectivist. That's why I tagged him on that. That's why I tagged him. I said, I think Satoshi Nakamoto is an Ayn Rand fan because I've read his stuff. He's absolutely an Ayn Rand fan.
It's interesting. Yeah, I'm glad to see that there are some objectivists who are into crypto, because I know, Atlas Society's had Michael Saylor speaking at their events too. And I think there's I think part of the reason why crypto came about is there's this realization that I think there's a realization now that democracy and capitalism can't coexist. And I don't think democracy and a gold standard can coexist.
I think that's true. I don't know, I don't know if Saylor would have been my pick. I was trying to introduce the Atlas Society to crypto in 2012, and it wasn't as well accepted at that point in time. But but it is good that, at least Saylor's there talking about the concepts. I'm concerned about. So what concerns me about this is I'm writing this book. I've been living off of crypto. And I lived through 2017 when there was huge demand for Bitcoin. People started using Bitcoin for commerce. Overstock was taking it. Microsoft was taking it. Expedia was taking it. But because of these small block sizes, all of a sudden with the increased demand, it was taking 6 days for a transaction to clear. It was costing $20, $30 to get a transaction done. That's not peer-to-peer cash for the world.
Oh, yeah.
So that frustrated me. And I think BTC hasn't fixed that. That still doesn't work. They did. So a group of people just did ordinals NFTs on BTC, and the demand spiked. And what did we learn? The fees and the processing time still isn't there. So if the banking system collapsed tomorrow, BTC can't handle any.
Oh yeah.
Onboarding.
I mean, I always compare it. You can go on Ameritrade and buy $10 million worth of Exxon stock for $20. And Bitcoin needs to get to that point too, where you can buy that much Bitcoin for a $20 fee. I mean, and it's not even close, And I don't know if you listen to Lex Friedman, but he had Charles Hodgkinson on, who does Cardano, and he compared Bitcoin to COBOL. And that is not, and if you know what we're talking, you're basically saying it's old and clunky. Because COBOL is an old programming language that nobody uses anymore. But
well, I don't like his characterization of that, just because if you look at BSV is doing 50,000 transactions per second. I've been using something called Twetch, which is a social network built on top of BSV where you can do micropayments. When you listen to Craig Wright, what he talks about with this is he says the idea behind this is it is to be global money for the world, but it's supposed to be used for microtransactions. Right? It's revolutionary money. So now you watch a movie on Netflix, you only watch 10 minutes of the movie, you only pay to watch 10 minutes of the movie. Like, this enables business models. Instead of like, one of the problems with big tech is, well, the services are free because you're the product. Your data is the product. Your information is the product. You're targeted for advertisements. But what if you could pay 3 cents for a search on Google and get the best search for you without bias towards advertisement, right?
Oh, yeah.
This is the kind of thing. This is what micropayments can facilitate. That's what Bitcoin was designed to do. It is a better form of cash. It's not an exclusive digital gold that only certain people can have, that you then have to set up your own Lightning network and everything else. It's supposed to be an innovative form, and it works. It's just that the toxicity. I'm hoping, actually, through this book and through my subsequent talks on this, to try, because I'm in all of these different communities. I'm in the Bitcoin Cash community. I'm in the BTC community. I want to try to get people to see if we can resolve. The enemy here is fiat and the collapse of fiat and the ushering in of CBDC. That is the enemy. The bitterness that's gone on between different versions of Bitcoin has been just tragic.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess coming from an
Aaron,
objectivist movement that has closed versus open objectivist,
yeah, Aaron,
battles, it's not a surprise.
It's almost exactly the same. The tone, the attitude, I mean, of orthodox randists and orthodox Bitcoiners. I mean, and then versus, the more open crypto people and the more open objectivists. You listen to them talk, and I mean, the attitudes, the attitudes and stuff, it's almost exactly the same. It's almost a replay. It's so,
Yeah.
And I would love to say to some of these people, some of these more orthodox people, the maxi pads or the maximalists, as we call them, and just say, do you know what you sound like? And I'd say to them, do you know where the Ayn Rand Institute is now? You don't want to go down that path because ARI has become a clown show. It's, and I don't want to see that happen with Bitcoin. And I think, and one thing happened, I think the biggest danger is you already drive away the best talent that way.
I think that's already happened. I think this last BTC conference, the attendance was down 50%, and now it's just people shouting at people, and it's a shame because some of the people that are still some of the biggest proponents of BTC do get it conceptually. They understand what the importance is of separation of money and state. But for instance, I look at somebody like Max Kaiser, who's advising the president of El Salvador to make everything that is not BTC an illegal security. That is not a open that is a horrible approach. I mean, now you're at a level of you're kind of like trying to push a dictator to be more of a dictator. That's how this becomes the future of money, I guess.
That's kind of what, I'm kind of afraid that's going to happen with Bitcoin, is they're going to try to try to establish themselves that way, saying we're a commodity, everything else is a security. Saifedean Ammous, he also put up a picture of himself with Bukele. And I'm still optimistic about what they're doing in El Salvador. I think it sounds like he had to clean up a horrible mess, and I don't advocate it. But I mean, what do you do in a situation like that? I think that at least the fact that making Bitcoin legal tender maybe gives El Salvador a chance to fix its problems. I hope it works out for them. But yeah,
I hope it does too. And I have a section about El Salvador in my book, and because this ties into, how did El Salvador get there? Well, like a lot of countries, like Nigeria is just suffered with their implementation of the CBDC. Like you're seeing with Argentina, the IMF comes in there and implements a top-down approach that destroys the country and has all these strings associated with it. And El Salvador at least stood up and said, you know what, we're not going to do this anymore. We're going to try something else. Unfortunately, if they had tried, so all of these wallets in El Salvador they're not self-custody wallets. They're state-controlled crypto wallets. Well, we've missed the plot here. So if BTC had large blocks and could actually handle scale, then you could actually roll this out in a way where the people of El Salvador could have their own wallets and truly own their own money. Right now, you have state-controlled wallets, and unfortunately, so I saw this Ordinals NFT project that people launched on BTC. It increased the demand. Fees went up. So now you have people in El Salvador who make $300 a whatever month or whatever it is, paying $20, $30 fees. I mean, it's now it's doing the opposite. Now it's like it's worse than Western Union. So I'm glad the experiment is going on. I just wish the experiment was going on in a way that was actually promoting self-custody, peer-to-peer cash that was revolutionary with low cost. Right? So.
I see what you're saying there. So you're not as optimistic about El Salvador as I thought. One thing, looking at a place like El Salvador and looking at the free state of New Hampshire, do you think there's more hope for the smaller places? I mean, New Hampshire, for example, has a legislator in New Hampshire represents less than 4,000 people, as opposed to, the U.S. Congress, which is now, I believe, seven or eight, even maybe 800,000 people.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, New Hampshire has one of the largest deliberative bodies in the world. I mean, if you think we have 400 people in the state house, we have 24 state senators. It's almost as large as the United States Congress. And so I think that's one of the reasons New Hampshire was picked: the small size and that ratio and the representation of a small number of the population represented by a single rep. But there are, as I said, and as I showed when I ran for U.S. Senate in 2016, this state is still run from the top down. So until you infiltrate the Senate and until you infiltrate the governor's office, you're not going to be able to do any of the big stuff. One of the things that's discouraging for me is, we have a Free Stater as the House Majority Leader, and there are Republican majorities. Not a very big one in the House, but there are Republican majorities across the board in New Hampshire. And this is the worst legislative session since I've been here in 14 years. They are increasing the budget as it stands right now. It's not finished, by 18%. And they have just extended Obamacare Medicaid expansion. They've made it permanent under all Republican majorities. So there's and I'm an outcast for this because I point these things out. It doesn't mean, when I say this, it doesn't mean I don't like the Free State Project. It doesn't mean that I don't think this is the place to be, but it does mean that the 20-year strategy of thinking that the state runs from the bottom up and that the way you're going to influence this is through the House has not worked. Now you can do the other stuff, but you could easily still do the other stuff. If people took some of the Bitcoin millions that are here and popped it into trying to elect state senators, you could completely change the outcome, but you can't focus just on the House. But I do think this is the place to be. I mean, this is where you asked me why not leave the country. Well, I've certainly looked before I came here. One of the talks that I gave at the Aloe Society was, is New Hampshire Galt's Gulch? And, and I went through an analysis of, okay, well, let's look at countries. How does America stack up? We're not the freest in terms of speech. We're not the fastest growing economy. In fact, the only thing that we're number one in is incarceration rate. I put together a whole series of metrics on this. It's actually pretty disheartening. But New Hampshire does have a lot of appeal to it. And when you consider, I looked at moving to Puerto Rico. I had a friend that moved to Puerto Rico from New Hampshire for a while.
Peter Schiff's in Puerto Rico.
Peter Schiff's, and it's a disaster. My friend that moved over there, I was going to move over there. I was like a month away from moving to Puerto Rico. And I'm glad I didn't, because they're going back on their promises with respect to taxation. There's all kinds of crime. The infrastructure is a disaster. That is not turning out to be anything like it was supposed to be. Panama is supposed to be a good place. I know some friends that have a place down there temporarily and everything else. But have I found anything that's actually better than New Hampshire? No. I did my research before picking New Hampshire, and I continue to do my research. And so to me, it's more about how do we make New Hampshire what we want it to be, as opposed to trying to find somewhere else, because the grass will not be greener. I'm sure of that based on what I've seen.
Do you think that the situation would be worse without the Free Staters, or do you think the Free Staters just aren't making it? I think
it'd be worse without the Free. I think it'd be worse without the Free Staters, but I think that I believe we're in the middle of an absolute collapse. So from my perspective, I'm more of the we need people to start focusing their attention not on holding on to the existing system, but kind of like 1776 style. We need people thinking from first principles about what do we do next. I'm at that stage. I'm at the stage. And so I will say we have a concentration of people that could be a part of that conversation in New Hampshire. My biggest fear is people get so caught up on their relative status and their position within state government that they actually only view the narrow political path of working through the state house as the only way to achieve liberty. And then don't do bold things or things that are outside of the box. That is my deepest concern about it. But I'm I'm not like tragically concerned about it, because there are thousands of free staters here, and there are only 40 or so that are elected to the state house. And I know these folks, and some of them are diehard. Some of them have been disappointing. I got to be honest. Some of them I think have been corrupted by the process, and some of them absolutely have not, and have remained absolutely steadfast in their principles. And so, something that like bothers me right now, it's like there's a whole group of them they're endorsing DeSantis for president. And here's their theory.
Or Vivek. Or Vivek.
Yeah. And I struggle with this. I'm not even asking for endorsements. So I'm not offended by it, because some of these people might even still end up voting for me. And there's a different aspect of this, but the aspect of this is, the theory is we don't have huge majorities in the House because Trump was the figurehead. And if DeSantis is at the top of the ticket, we will have better down ticket results and we'll get more liberty. This is their theory. This is literally the justification that they have for supporting DeSantis, is that DeSantis will drive more down ticket and it will help the state. But here's the thing. My wife was the chairman of the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance for 4 years, from like 2010 to 2014.
Yeah.
In 2011, we cut the budget by 11%. Like literally actually cut the budget 11%.
Yeah.
There was a Democrat governor. There was a Democrat president. Obama was in the White House. We had a Democrat governor, but we had a huge majority in the House. So this idea that Trump is the reason that we don't have the majority, I think, is a deflection for whatever their strategy was, didn't turn out the vote and didn't win the election in 2022. So now to me, this is just scapegoats and excuses and everything else. And so it's discouraging, because in my view, DeSantis and Trump aren't even viable. Like you're picking which tyrant. I don't think anybody that was in power during the COVID tyranny should be in power anywhere. I think that it's not a question of who was the least bad. How about we move outside of people that participated in that tragedy? And
Christy
so that's
Nome.
Christy
Nome. Christy Nome
exactly.
in South Dakota. Yes.
Yep, exactly. So there's that aspect of it, but so this is why I'm kind of discouraged. So I think DeSantis will pick up more independents, but I think Trump people will act. Well, there will be a certain contingent of Trump people that will not vote for him in the general election, because they view him even being in the race as a betrayal. So I think it's going to be an offset. And I think Trump probably won't win, because I just don't think Trump can win. Trump can't win.
I don't know. It's there's so much that can happen, and I say for either one of them, and one thing I say, for either Biden or Trump, either one of them could have some kind of major medical event, but New Hampshire it's kind of interesting, but it looks like you actually cut the budget by 11%, which is impressive. I don't know. I don't know what motivates some to why certain people get into political alliances, or what motivates their thinking. Sometimes it just makes me wonder why we're so screwed up. Is Bob Smith still doing anything up in New Hampshire? Because he was actually a pretty decent senator when he was senator. I mean,
I don't think he's. I met with him in 2014. I think he ran in 2014. I have not seen him very vocal. In fact, he was flipping around back and forth between Florida and New Hampshire. I don't even know if he's in New Hampshire anymore. Yeah. So I haven't seen him. I have to admit, I probably have less optimism for Texas than you do for New Hampshire, even though Texas still has no income tax, because we weren't very good on the coronavirus nonsense, and they're just increasing the spending here and just going crazy with all of it here. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if South Dakota or Wyoming would be the place, but New Hampshire is nice because there is a lot more of a social life going on there with the Free State Project, to their credit. I wouldn't want to just dilute. I wouldn't want to dilute the Free State Project. I do know there's Monte Libero, which is a bunch of Europeans who want to go to Montenegro to set up their own little Free State Project in Europe. A lot of Russians are involved with that, for example, because
they realize that Russia is completely a lost cause and probably always will be.
Yep.
But so good for them. So I don't think where we're going with this. So yeah, that is interesting to hear where PorcFest is going. It's I don't understand. Yeah. And I don't understand either why some of these people in our movement seem to be. Why aren't they talking about you? I mean, because you're really the closest thing to you're really the only Liberty Republican running, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, so there are a few things really. I'm fairly controversial. I've been gone essentially. There are people that didn't know I was still in New Hampshire. Like I've been literally since 2019. I have been focusing on myself. I lost 150 pounds. I got remarried. I have been spending a lot of time with my kids, helping my daughter with her business. And then she has dance. My son has completely different activities with robotics. So I'm literally at the point where and I don't know Dennis that well. And so Dennis I think he's upset about the fact that I haven't come to PorcFest or whatever, but yeah, I agree. I should be speaking but just nobody's heard from me from a while outside of social media. But to be honest, I think my book in this topic is completely relevant. It's 100% relevant.
Yeah.
But I haven't held any political events yet. And what I'm still hoping happens is that PorcFest is my first actual public facing event. That's what I'm shooting for. And I know Ian supported and I think that I think once people hear or read the book, they're going to have a completely different viewpoint of it. But I've been outside of the box. I mean, again, I ran a slate of people. I didn't just run against Kelly Ayotte. I ran a slate of people. I said, I wasn't just, if you guys push Medicaid expansion, we're going to make sure Kelly Ayotte doesn't win. We're going to also make sure that we lose the 2 of the congressional seats and the governor's race. And we did. We lost the independent slate, which was it's hard to get on the ballot as an independent. You have to collect all these signatures. You have to have them validated. Yes. The Republican Party challenged. They actually went to every town hall and tried to challenge all of the signatures that we got on all the petitions. They really wanted to block this, and they weren't able to. But the guy that I had on that was running for governor, they managed to keep him off the ballot by saying that he wasn't registered to vote, which I think was a lie. And Chris Sununu would never have been governor had this guy been on the ballot, and we would have been better off for it. We have not benefited by having Chris Sununu as governor. Unfortunately, the people that remained after that 2016 election, I think, more cozied up to Sununu and were more supportive of him and shouldn't have been. And if you see this across the board, whenever one party has complete control, you get an increase in government. It doesn't matter which. That doesn't matter which party. So 2011, it was still the watermark. I know it's possible to cut government by double-digit percentage. That was a phenomenal thing to see. It was a great thing to see. But in 10 years, we've gone from an 11% cut to an 18% increase. We've gone from fighting Medicaid expansion to permanently extending Medicaid expansion. The federal government is now responsible for 31% of New Hampshire's budget. Now, there are a lot of people in New Hampshire that are for secession and for an independence movement, and I think that's great. I'm on board with that. That's fine. How are you going to do that when you're getting 31.5% of your budget from the federal government?
That's something that some pro-unionists will point out, is that a lot of these red states are actually getting more money than they're paying in. I've heard the situation with gun rights has gotten a lot better
in New Hampshire.
Yes.
Oh yeah, great. It's great in New Hampshire. No, we have constitutional carry here. Guns are great, and I'm not saying it isn't all negative. At all. And again, I wouldn't go anywhere else. And I only say these things because I hope, maybe at some point we can adjust strategy, because we can adjust strategy. Sometimes what happens is people want to take, this is what happens in politics. This is why you get these bills that say something, right? So DeSantis is out there saying, I've banned CBDCs. He has not banned CBDCs. Read the bill. But most people think he's banned CBDCs. So what happens with these politicians is they'll get into a situation where they want the headline, but they're not willing to fight for the substance. I'll tell you one thing that's driven me nuts is there's a push to tax and regulate pot in New Hampshire. I mean, we don't have good pot laws. We're actually the only state in New England where it's still illegal. But we were pushing for this big tax and regulate thing. All these liberty people were pushing this bill. And I'm like, what? You're going to expand government yet again? One of the things that we say is so great about New Hampshire is we don't have sales tax. And so your solution is, well, we've got to get a pot bill done, so we'll tax and regulate it. And what did we see in Colorado? They taxed and regulated it, and now they're laying off 10 to 12,000 people in the marijuana industry because the costs are too high and people are buying it illegally from other sources. So it's stuff like that that drives me nuts. But again, I'm a little bit on the extreme on this. So
it seems that there's a lot of people in. You have two approaches to politics, and one side will always advocate for what they really want, and the other side will advocate for what they think they can get. And we see that among libertarians too. And if you only try to go after for what you think, it's just imagine you want a job, and say, hey, how much money you want? If you should ideally say even more than what you want, because then what you want sounds reasonable. But if you just say what you think you can get, you're not going to go anywhere. It's I imagine some of these, I have to confess, I've been a real chump when it comes to jobs, because so many times they've just said, oh, we'll give you X. I'll say, okay. And now it's like, no, always negotiate.
Yep.
If they say they'll give you X, then go, okay, X plus 10%. But anyway, it's and that's often, I don't know. It seems like I think that's actually a lot of the divide among libertarians is, and I think it really heated up during COVID, because there was some libertarians saying, okay, well, maybe if we compromise here or compromise there. And Ayn Rand herself was not a compromiser, but.
No, she was not.
I got to ask.
I agree with your assessment of it. And I've seen some people debating this internally. And there is kind of this view of, even between Democrats and Liberty Republicans, where Democrats play to win and we play not to lose. And I think that there very much is that concept. And then there almost becomes an arrogance about it. Well, we're just doing what's possible. You don't understand how it actually works. It's like, I understand how it works. It's not working, right? We have 31% of the budget's controlled by the federal government. The size of government in New Hampshire has grown. It's not working. So this is why I come up with strategies like, I'm going to run an independent slate and cost the Republican Party all of the federal races, right? The reason that I did that was nobody thought, the chairman of the NHGOP sat down with me for 2 hours. Her name was Jennifer Horn. And she said, no one will believe you. No one will think that you can do it. No one will take you seriously. And then no one will let you back in the party. And I said, okay, well, whatever. I'm doing it anyway. And obviously they were worried about it, or she wouldn't have been meeting with me for 2 hours. I gave people a year's worth of notice. Everybody knew I was doing this, and everybody knew why I was doing this. But I actually felt I followed through with it. I did what I said I was going to do. And so now it's like, okay, so now so if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to put it forth an effort to do it. I'm not actually just bluffing. I'm going to actually put forward an effort to do it. And my reasoning for doing that is, I could go into a lot of detail. I've written articles about this, but New Hampshire's budget is just filled with all kinds of fraud and scams related to Medicaid. We actually fund a pretty big chunk of our budget through what's called a Medicaid enhancement tax, where we take money that should be going to hospitals and we put it in our general fund. So there is an incentive built into our system to prop up these big bloated nonprofit hospitals that are getting all of this Medicaid money. And all of the legislation pushing that was pushed by Republicans. And so I push on this, and no one wants to talk about it. No one wants to spend time understanding it, because then when you follow the money always goes back to Republicans. It actually goes back to John Sununu, not Chris Sununu. This stuff dates back to when his father was the chief of staff for President George Herbert Walker Bush, and they were passing some of this medical stuff in the early 1990s. This is so I documented all of that, and I put all of it out, and most people glaze over it. Most people don't read it. And then if you do understand it, you don't want it getting out. Let's just say there are a lot of people that are very unhappy about me continuing to point out that, I mean, Sununu is thinking about running for president, and he tries to run for president claiming he's a libertarian and saying he's a fiscal conservative. There is zero truth to that whatsoever. And I can document it. But again, I'm not negative Free State Project. What I'm not going to do is continue to participate in the strategy that doesn't work and that can't work. But I still think this is the place to be. And I hope more people move here.
Obviously. And, we also want to point out, you can still go in your car without a seatbelt in New Hampshire. And of course, many state legislatures passed those laws because they got federal money, but New Hampshire said no. And so New Hampshire is still no seatbelts. Thank you. But
well, I'd rather not have the 31.5% budget. I'd rather not.
There are other issues that are larger than that, but the seatbelt law to me is that just, some of these things just are so indicative of philosophical evils, and that's one of them. But anyway, it seems as though one thing I've noticed in politics too, though, is for starters, I think conservatives are often like the football team that's running, has a big lead and they run a prevent defense. The only problem is, the game's never over. You can't stop running a prevent defense. But also, sometimes I see like there's this attitude among libertarians they score the football game is 70-0. They score one touchdown in the last 3 minutes, and then they act like they've won the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And I mean, okay, that's better than not scoring, but even when I hear, it's like it's almost like simply existing is victory. And it's like, no, that's not really victory, or getting 1 or 2% of the vote is some kind of win. No, it's not. And I sometimes look at them and say, do you want to improve? Because you seem content with what we're getting.
There's an element to a strategy. There are, again, different philosophical views for everybody in a liberty movement and free state movement and even an objectivist movement. But there's been a prevailing attitude that says only a very small percentage of people actually want liberty, and that it's a really small percentage. And we just need to be as outrageous as we possibly can, make as much noise as we possibly can to attract those people. It's almost like we're the homeland for wayward libertarians, of which there's only 1% of the population, and that 1% is somehow some like fixed law or fixed rule, and people are, there's a resignation to the fact that people in general just don't like liberty. I happen to think, and part of the time that I spent away from politics, interacting with people, I did some weird stuff that's way outside of objectivism. I got involved with meditation and doing a whole bunch of stuff that I never thought I would be doing, but it is kind of eye-opening. You can deal with your kind of trauma, the stuff that makes up your identity. You can actually address that, and you can change. And when I've seen people do this, and when they do this, they gravitate towards being able to have more choice. You realize that you can not be defined by your past. You can view it as an experience, but not necessarily who you are. It's just something that you experienced. And then you can free yourself up for more and different experiences, which to me is liberty. And so I don't buy the idea that we're just trying to shout at and collect 1%. I think what I've seen people that would not identify as small L liberty or objectivist, but that have gone through a process where they've realized that we really do have more infinite potential than they might have otherwise thought, and that there is more free will than determinism. I've seen that shift happen, even if it isn't labeled politically or philosophically. But again, how do you convey that? I don't know. There's just differences of opinion. And with the Free State Project, different people run the project at different times. I mean, it's kind of like I had my era where I was there for 3 years, and then you burn out. You can't do this stuff for 20 years. You can't jump in and be involved with all these events and do all this stuff sustainably for a long period of time. So you kind of get different waves and different perspectives that come in. But the overall tapestry is you have a lot of different divergent views, and I think those are all reflected at PorcFest.
Yeah. Activist burnout's always been a problem. I occasionally just tell some people, go take a month off, just because I think they just get burned out. How some of them keep going, I don't really know.
No, I had to take 4 years off. Like again, I was so.
Yeah, and you've got a family.
I had a family. I was running 5 organizations at the same time, including the Atlas Society, and there was a string of, between June and July, it would be like event after event after event, and it was just absolute burnout. And then on top of that, you have the election, right? So New Hampshire is the first in the nation primary. So when that gets swept up with everything else, I mean, it's just, it's very taxing. So to the extent I'm getting back involved, it's not going to be in any way like I was before. But again, I still think the Free State Project is where it's at. Yeah. I just don't know that the local political strategy is a winning one. But when everything falls apart, I look at it this way. I spent a little bit of time in Florida in 2019, and then my wife and I traveled around the country, and I think we hit, I don't know, probably 20 different states. And if things get bad, if you have a situation where the electrical grid goes out or you've got some other kind of situation, I would much rather be in New Hampshire than Florida or many of these other states, because this place I don't think will devolve into Mad Max overnight. Some other places, like when I was in Florida, I think October of 2019, and there was a hurricane expected to come. It didn't even end up hitting or in a meaningful way, but it was like a week out, and there were already people fighting at the gas station. There were lines, and there was already like violence and a lot of weird stuff going on for a hurricane that was a week out that didn't even end up hitting. And so I actually thought to myself, would I want to be in Florida if something serious happened? Like the place would devolve into violence very quickly, because it was already getting violent just over filling up the gas tank way ahead of a storm that never hit. So, I think New Hampshire is pretty self-sufficient in that regard.
Well, New Hampshire also has a coastline and has a border with Canada, which I think helps. So it's better to be in New Hampshire than be in a state that's completely surrounded. But yeah.
Yep. No, that's true.
Aaron, obviously, I don't know all the details of your life, but you come off as certainly being a guy who's I would call just a winner in life. Does it seem like political activism attracts maybe a higher percentage of people that we would call losers, or I mean, I see some people like you are successful, and I'm just thinking, why does this person get involved with politics at all?
Well, the only reason I got involved in politics is because I had a business destroyed by politics. Yeah. I mean, I would say hell hath no fury like an entrepreneur scorned. Like seriously, this is. I wouldn't be involved in politics at all. We talked about this at the beginning. I think the happiest and the most productive that I've ever been is still back when I was 19, working on my first company. That was enthralling. And then to have a simple company like I had, because again, I only described part of it, right? This was a simple business. We provided an app. People were competing to lose weight. They were earning financial rewards. The employers saved money. The employees made money. Their health improved. We made money. This was not complicated. This wasn't like I was doing some crypto thing. There was nothing from my perspective. I set out to create a business that was simple and that solved a problem. And not only did Obamacare happen, but we would pay these employees that were improving their health, and we would use either debit cards or pay them with checks, or we would use points that they could redeem for merchandise, right? So let's say you had a reloadable debit card, and we'd add funds every quarter because we'd go in and measure the employees every quarter. Because of Dodd-Frank, they added a fee. So large banks with $10 billion more of assets were assessed a special fee. So they had to get out of that prepaid debit card business. So we had clients all over the country with these reloadable debit cards. I got a letter from Citibank in the mail. It said, we are discontinuing this line of business. And it was because of Dodd-Frank. I had a vendor that would process our checks. So if we were writing checks, like we had a hospital system in Wisconsin that had 5,000 people as one of our clients, and they opted for checks. Well, it's expensive for us to do it ourselves and to have our own employees cutting the checks. So we used a vendor that had been in business since 1978 in Connecticut, and they did check writing services for thousands of clients. So what you would do is we would send them the money, like we'd send them $250,000 for these rewards to pay out. Other companies would pay, and then they would write checks out of one shared account. Well, Eric Holder comes in and says, well, these guys are doing check writing services for people that are doing illegal offshore gambling. So they seize all of the accounts for all of the clients of the check writing vendor. And so we bounced checks, like we bounced $250,000 worth of checks to a hospital, and there was no way to replenish the funds. And we were deemed guilty until we could prove that we were innocent. So I've got a simple business. I'm trying to pay people to improve their health. Obamacare says I can't do that and use corporate money marked for insurance funds. I have Dodd-Frank saying that I can't use debit cards. And then I have the attorney general coming in and saying, well, you can't use this reputable check writing vendor. I mean, are you kidding me? So at that point, so do I want to be doing political activism? No, this is, and again, my point for this campaign is to say, there isn't a political solution to this. This thing is sinking. My message in this campaign is take your money out of the banks, put it into self-custody alternatives. If you don't like public school, nobody's going to strip away the Department of Education. And by the way, I left out one thing. I ran for school board. And of all of the political activism I've ever done, that was the most vicious and the most cutthroat thing I have ever done in my life. Like it was even worse than running for U.S. Senate. 1% of the town that I lived in, Bedford, 1% was in a Facebook group working actively to campaign against me, to defame me, and to spread campaign information. We had 250 people proactively watching what I was doing at my house, spreading false information through mailers, doing things at the polls. So if anybody thinks that you're going to change anything at school, people are not having success with school boards. You might win one thing here or there, and then it just gets wiped out the next go around. Why? Because in small towns, the school is one of the largest employers. Where do they hold elections? They hold the elections in the schools and then tell all of the teachers, staff, and administrators that they have the day off. The whole thing is stacked against you, and they're using your own taxpayer money against you. So my point is, you're not going to change this woke stuff. We need to have a mass movement of people pulling their kids out of school. That will actually solve that problem. People need to turn off mainstream media. So turn off mainstream media, stop using big tech, and then let's talk about what we can do. But you can't remain brainwashed, programmed, censored while your kids are being indoctrinated and you're using a Ponzi currency that the government's going to turn into a centralized control system and think that you've got a shot at changing the political system. That's as basic as I can summarize my pitch for my campaign. So I was saying about mass non-compliance.
Yeah, I don't think we'll ever change that. And like I said, things like also, the teachers unions and things like that. I don't think, and the fact that the teachers all come from a certain crop of colleges, and it's really interesting. I don't know if America can be salvaged. I feel like COVID was probably just the beginning of the end, but I don't know how it's going to end. But really,
I'm curious. I'm curious because I haven't been involved, but you mentioned ARI. So what happened? What was the ARI 2020 drama?
They were promoting an epidemiologist who said a lot of nice things about Anthony Fauci and just seemed to go along with most of what was said. They even required different vaccination levels at the conferences and stuff like that. It's they really bought into a lot of it. I don't see that happening with Atlas Society. I don't really seeing that happen with the Objectivist standard wing either, since there's now another wing going on there. They seem like they're pretty cool. Not to mention, ARI's OCON was supposed to be in Austin, so I said, okay, well, it's going to be in Austin. I'll go. since it's going to be here. And then it got virtualized. And I'll tell you what, ARI was an old crowd. I mean, I felt like the young guy there. And I don't know where ARI is going, but it's ARI. The only thing is they're still going to have the money off the copyrights, but once that goes away, I don't see where it's going to go. It's is there any other place you've traveled around the country? Have you traveled worldwide? Any other place you really liked worldwide, or?
Well, I mean, it was pre-COVID, so I went for some retreats. So I went to Malta, I went to England, spent a little bit of time in London, went to Spain. I mean, no place I would move to. I like to travel, but I nowhere that would be an alternate place to live. There are a lot of places that are good to visit. But certainly not good places to. I mean, when we were in Spain, there was a lot of political protesting going on and actual riots when we were there. In Barcelona, and I wasn't paying attention to the news when I booked that flight. But anyway, it was interesting nevertheless. And when I travel through the different states, I mean, I grew up in Indiana, and so Indiana seems to be okay. I mean, the states I've lived in, the most, Indiana, Florida, and New Hampshire, all score fairly high from a pro-liberty perspective. But I mean, I don't even recognize most of the rest of the country. And, and the traveling that I did was during COVID. And so, I mean, I'm looking at it like, when did we become this compliant? I was shocked by that.
I wasn't shocked just because I saw what happened after the World Trade Center. And maybe I'm just more cynical, but I've been looking into what I call the problem of human servility. But after this, I also realized that, it's to use the Star Trek analogy, this planet is a lot more like the Klingons than it is like the Vulcans. And that's I think you can turn I think it's easy to turn the crowd violent if you want to turn them violent. You just have to manipulate them, because I think they would have done a lot worse things if they could have gotten away with them. But I think
unfortunately, I think you're right. I mean, what they did get away with was reprehensible, and again, I think it's the precursor for what's next. I think that CBDC. When I started this campaign, I thought we had 1 to 3 years, and now I think we have less than 12 months. And that frightened me doing the research in the book, because I didn't realize that the pilots were already conducted and that the technology already worked. So I'm sitting here, when you look at what they did with COVID. Like, I didn't even realize there are 85 million surveillance cameras in the United States already today. I think the average person has their picture taken 6 times, not including whatever you do yourself post yourself through social media. This is already put in place. Contact tracing systems and all of the infrastructure and all of these updates that happen to mobile devices through big tech as part of COVID. There are 600 million surveillance cameras in China, and their social credit system, they're taking pictures of everything. If you put 2 bottles of alcohol into your shopping cart instead of 1, but you decide to put 1 back, they still will actually track that and penalize you accordingly. The level of detail, the amount of information they're collecting in China is incredible. But when you look at it, I have this map that shows how Chinese surveillance technology has spread across the globe, including to the United States. We get half of our surveillance technology in the United States from China. We've implemented all these systems. We've let this happen. So in my opinion, we're one false flag away from them implementing whatever the next control system is. And I saw that Biden came out yesterday and said he's listed 100 actions he's going to do to stop hate and anti-Semitism. Which, where do we have anti-Semitism? Like, I don't even understand. Like, where is this even coming from at this point in time? Like, that he would state in the middle of everything that's going on right now that whatever free speech restriction they're going to put in place next, they're using the anti-Semitism tag. I don't even know where that came from. Like, it's not like there have been big, I don't know anything. I haven't noticed that.
Well, there was that thing that came out, we're issuing a travel advisory for Florida. It's not safe for minorities. And I'm like, I mean, these organizations didn't even put stuff out like that in the 1950s. It was, I, I mean, it's truly remarkable what, and it's the thing, if you form an organization to go out to solve a problem and then the problem goes away, what does the organization do after that?
Yep. Yeah, no,
I've certainly known people who have been smeared by the Southern Poverty Law Center. I knew them personally, and I don't know. I do. The tech is definitely troubling. The only thing I can say too is it seems like this could also very likely be a target for hackers.
Well, it is a target for hackers. Yesterday, Microsoft announced that
Mm-hmm.
all aspects of U.S. critical infrastructure have been hacked by the Chinese, which, again, I'm viewing this as earlier this week, we learned that 50 U.S. senators were issued satellite phones. Then we learned that all of our critical infrastructure has been hacked, and they didn't do any direct damage. It was just an information collection exercise. So basically, they have everything: rail, transportation, all of these systems. And my opinion is, I've been saying this for a while, I think that's how they're going to unload CBDC. We're going to have some kind of event related to the grid, and then what we're going to get out of it is CBDC and even further restriction on speech. I did a bunch of videos in 2020 because I was trying to talk about COVID. I did a series of videos on decentralized alternatives for everything. That's how I found out Jitsi. I'm like, if you're using Zoom, switch to Jitsi. If you're using text messages, switch to Signal. If you're using YouTube, switch to Odyssey. And I did a whole series of those kinds of things. And I immediately got blocked on Facebook. And so clearly they're going to add another layer to this. Because too much of the truth is getting out. I don't know if Musk is a good guy or a bad guy, but he's at least given us a 90-day window to share more information than we were previously able to share.
Musk is a wild card. Sometimes I think some of these people, and I might even apply this to Trump, they just go out of their way to be as unpredictable as they can be. Because really being unpredictable is sometimes the best strategy in a situation like this.
Yep, well, that's true.
So you don't really ever know: is he on our side? Is he not on our side? It's
no,
really,
you don't, and it really is what Musk wants Twitter to become. This concept of X.
Yeah,
that he rebranded the company X it's based off of WeChat, and WeChat is very much tied into the Chinese social credit system and everything else. So on the one hand, I look at it as, is he the free market alternative, or is he actually the centralized version of this? And I don't have an answer. It's frustrating. Twitter's the only big tech platform I use at this point. Although we could go into a whole other separate conversation on AI, which has been a fascinating one. That I've done all my campaign stuff with AI. I've done the artwork, the images, writing the book. I wrote the book myself, but I've used multiple AIs to do research, and then I've used AIs to serve as like an editor. To correct grammar and to like see if the tone is good and everything else. And just in the span of 90 days of writing this book, this technology has advanced faster than anything I have ever seen. And I've been involved in tech since 1995. Like we went from, I was using ChatGPT and it could only handle 500 words at a time. And what it gave you back was, it was kind of mid. To a week ago, I was able to paste all 50,000 words of my book into another AI called Anthropic and have it give me a complete overview of all of the book, meaning, do the chapters flow well together? Is it the same tone? I asked it to like give me suggestions for each chapter. I just cut and pasted the entire book, and in 30 seconds, it crunched through it. Like that. So when I look at ChatGPT 3.5 90 days ago, and then this Anthropic Claude thing last week, I've never seen that kind of a speed of technology. I even upgraded the
Yeah.
images on my website. I used Midjourney for the initial round, and then used Midjourney 5.1 and just updated the images. And I looked at this like, this just happened in 60 days.
Yeah.
And when I think about education, so my kids are 12. They're in Montessori school, which, I mean, there are big ties with Ayn Rand, and there's an objectivist Montessori tie. And there was a guy that was on the board of the Atlas
Yes.
Society, whose I believe grandfather helped smuggle Maria Montessori out of the country, and there's a real connection there. But my kids are in Montessori
Oh, I
school,
didn't
and
realize that. Out of the, you probably know Marsha Enright.
I know Marsha Enright, sure.
Yeah, and we had Charlotte Cushman on here too. She's talking about how woke has invaded Montessori.
It's
That was
what?
my third show. Woke has invaded Montessori.
Okay, it has, and
Yeah.
we've just witnessed that in this year. So this is actually something, and I'd be curious to dig more into that. And actually, maybe I'll watch your show on that if you dig
Yeah.
into that. Which episode was that?
That was the
Do you know?
third one.
The third one. All right, I'll check that out, because it's true, woke has. But then there's the real question of, okay, once they're done with Montessori in ninth grade, what do they do next? I mean, you look at STEM.
Yeah.
STEM is replaced by AI. STEM is completely replaced by. If you're sending your kid to a school to learn, well, at least the way they teach STEM, is pointless, because that's been replaced by ChatGPT interfacing with Wolfram Alpha. Like, you're not going to find people doing those jobs. Like, there is going to be a massive, and I'm not talking about 5 years from now, we're talking about the next 12 to 24 months. The impact of AI is going to be, people are going to have to, your fundamental identity is going to be questioned in terms of what your role is in the economy because of these AI developments. So I'm spending a lot of time researching that myself, because I don't know what to do for my kids. I don't know, pushing them through the education is behind anyway, right? Education doesn't adapt, never has.
Yeah.
And as we know from Blumenfeld and others, it was never intended to. It's a social experiment that's trying to design and craft a particular outcome.
It's always schooling, not education, has always been a social experiment, whether it be religious indoctrination or training soldiers. Really, it's
yeah. So I don't. So what you throw AI in there, and there's a real question. Like, I don't know what I don't have a direction for my kids. It's part of my research for this next book, though, is actually to figure out what that should be in the realm of AI. But what I don't like about it, so there's so it is an amazing technology. The scariest part about it, though, is that it's big tech. The scariest part isn't even the AI itself. It's the layer that they put on top of the AI to filter the AI. Whoever controls the filter of AI has more control than even any political body at this point in time. And that is a scary proposition, because the people that are behind OpenAI are not the kind of people ideologically. In fact, this guy, Sam Altman, behind OpenAI, I see he's pushing something called WorldCoin, which is basically some form of UBI, but that's tied to biometrics. And this is some scary stuff. And the thing is, the rate of development of this technology is, this isn't 5 years from now stuff. This is next year stuff.
I haven't done anything with AI because I'm just looking at it. Artificial intelligence is going to be used for nefarious purposes. I have almost no confidence that it will be used for anything good.
Well, it could be, but I would recommend checking it out, just so that
True,
have a sense for what it is. Because,
and what kind of information are they gathering on the users? That's the other question I'd ask. But it's no different from how we could probably use nuclear power to solve our energy problems, but instead we use it to kill people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So it's. And I think that's sad, but I think a lot of people are just becoming probably going to become skeptical of tech, a lot of tech, just for this reason alone, because these people are amoral, and this leads me to a question, too, having been in business, and we can remember when Bill Gates had no lobbyists, and I remember thinking, what is going to happen when he starts lobbying? But does every Henry Reardon eventually become an Orrin Boyle? I mean, it seems that way.
It absolutely seems like it. I mean, Gates fell off the reservation. The Google guys are an absolute disaster. I mean, I don't necessarily.
Well,
Steve Jobs doesn't seem to have.
Yeah,
I don't know what Apple would look like if Steve Jobs were there today. Certainly, Apple's a woke company. So,
well, what's also interesting. I'm curious. I wish Paul Allen had been alive during COVID. I would have liked to have heard what he had to say about Gates, because I think that was a fairly ugly breakup. And also, Aaron, and this is a guy who's claimed to be into Ayn Rand, Mark Cuban.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think Mark, and I know Mark Cuban has said that he likes the Fountainhead. In particular, I think that's his favorite. But I would not consider him to be. He's certainly not an objectivist. I've followed his stuff. He's kind of infuriating to watch. And when I was running the Atlas Society, of course, I was always trying to find big donors. And that was another area. You're like, well, isn't big tech disappointing? Well, you would think, if you're finding all of these captains of industry and you're trying to find people to bring into the fold, that there would be a lot of people that were objectivists or that were associated with Atlas Shrugged. And I will tell you, I reached out to a lot. I could find Chip Wilson, the chairman of Lululemon. I think that the president of Adobe at one point. But other than that, I mean, and I did a lot of research. There may be a handful of people that would admit to liking Ayn Rand or Atlas Shrugged, but most corporations have gone woke. And I'll tell you, this is a struggle. I don't know if this is still a struggle within the objectivist movement, but you read a book like Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, which was one of my favorites. Like, this is like one of my favorites when I was 17, 18 years old. I loved that book. And
that was my first book.
She put up a big defense for big business. And I know even at the Atlas Society, we had a business rights center, and we were pushing big business. But I've got to tell you right now, I'm hard pressed to defend big business, because most big business has become about cronyism, and has become about lobbying, and has become about pushing a woke agenda and using government influence to win contracts. There aren't a lot of big businesses that are worthy of defense, and there aren't a lot of big businesses that are willing to defend themselves on principle.
Yeah, Aaron, I've got a theory on this. And have you read any of Hans Hermann Hoppe?
I haven't, but it's on my list.
And there's the whole concept of high time preference and low time preference. And he applies this to democracy versus monarchy. And he says, a monarch does not want to bankrupt his country. He wants to leave his his oldest son and his oldest grandson with a prosperous country. He has a low time preference. He wants his country to be prosperous, and he wants his country to be prosperous for a long time. And I think there's also something with business as well. And, I start a business. You start a business as I want to leave a successful business to my children, to my grandchildren, and they can pass it down too. But all that goes away once the business becomes publicly traded.
Yep.
The time preference goes out the window.
Yep. Then it becomes one quarter is the time preference, right? There's no long-term planning.
Yeah, there's no long-term planning, and I learned, and I saw this, publicly traded company. I saw this when I worked for the Conscious Capitalist for 4 years. I worked at the corporate office of Whole Foods.
Wow. Okay.
And it was like, you could tell and it was amazing how wasteful it was. You could tell it was, and I noticed some of the best companies out there are still private. Chick-fil-A, HEB grocery stores, which is a regional grocery store around here, but is all over Texas. Publix grocery stores in Florida, another one. They're not national, but a lot of these really great companies are private. They're because once they and I'm just and you know when I heard Coinbase was going public, I said, oh no, it's over for Coinbase. Yeah.
Yep.
And I really wonder if that's part of the issue here because.
Well, public is one thing, and I don't even know what the cutoffs are anymore because I haven't
mean,
looked at
like
it.
publicly traded on the stock market.
But I think even once you hit I don't know what the threshold, 50 employees or 100 employees, there are different rules and things that you have to follow anyway, whether you're public or not, that become, when I started my second company, we kept the company under 20 employees, and because we outsourced everything, because I said, I don't want to deal with any of this, the HR guidelines and all of the stuff that you have to do, all of the compliance training and all of the things that come with just having a certain number of employees. It's ridiculous. And what I see going on in corporations now with the diversity and inclusion movement and everything else, like this stuff has become disconnected from reality. This is why you look at it. The funny thing about big tech is you look at Facebook and you look at Twitter, and the product didn't improve for 10 years, but yet they added tens of thousands of employees. And what we found when Elon took over Twitter is that most of those employees were censoring people. They weren't doing anything to the product. They were literally filtering the product and social engineering.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing too that happened. You get all the, and I think that's one of the worst things that happened with our economy is we have so many people whose jobs are nothing more than going to meetings and pushing papers. When COVID hit, I was doing server work for hospitals, and I saw how unbelievably screwed up that whole business is. Healthcare has actually managed to combine the worst elements of crony capitalism and the worst elements of socialism, and in a way, American healthcare is, I think outright socialized medicine probably would be better than American healthcare, because they've managed to get all of the worst problems with everything in there. But the other thing too is just the real, one thing I learned too, though, is I gained more respect for the people working on the front lines in healthcare, the patient facing users, the people who were working with patients. I said, I have more respect for them. And I said, but I have no respect for the people running things. None.
Yep.
And I don't know what it is too, but Aaron, we've gotten this situation in this country where almost everybody that's in any kind of position of authority is just, it's like, how did these people get into these positions, and how did they get so much power? Because they're not impressive. They're completely out of touch with reality.
What I've learned about this is they're selected because they're compliant, not because they're exceptional. And that's will they play by the rules? What I've found, because my healthcare company, a lot of our clients were hospitals, and so what you find is often the CEO of a hospital system will be a lawyer. I mean, and it's just because of they're dealing with trying to extract government money from Medicaid, from Medicare. They're trying to suppress malpractice lawsuits. Like it's an absurd job. It's absurd how it functions. But I agree with you. There's nothing free market about our system. It is absolutely the worst. An insurance company does nothing.
Yes.
They're a useless middleman. They're told by the government how much they can charge. You can only can only differentiate prices. They're told how much money they have to hold in reserves. And how do they make their profit? By holding on to premiums and delaying paying claims so that they can earn interest income. What kind of a business model is it where inefficiency is your source of net profit margin?
Oh yeah, it's a mess. Yeah, it's interesting too, because look at car insurance, and can you imagine how hard it would be to get an oil change if oil change were covered under your car insurance? I mean, that would be a mess. Yeah. But we've also lost sight of what insurance really is. Insurance is designed to protect against sudden catastrophic expenses. The kind of expense that would be maybe 2 months of your paycheck. It's not meant for things like oil changes or something that maybe is only 3 or 4 hours pay.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
And
the
when all that
concept
stuff
of
goes under that umbrella, it just becomes a complete mess. I mean, yeah.
Well, and on top of that, we've got so much complexity and so many kind of black swan events that a lot of people don't realize that insurance can go broke. People don't realize that. They just assume if you pay into insurance that it's always going to be there. And I think what we're learning with the FDIC, as an example, and others,
Yes.
look, even with COVID, with this excess mortality for 18 to 49-year-olds, I mean, I think New York Life Insurance Company has a higher credit rating than the United States government, and they've been around since whatever the 1800s, but they could fail. They could absolutely fail because we're seeing a series of black swan events happen that nobody could predict. No matter how good your actuary is, your actuaries are still predicting what they think tomorrow is going to be like based on the past, but 30 years of 50 years of data is not really that much. And if you zoom out,
I think the next possible black swan event right now could be something. Maybe they'll either try to blame it on the Russians, or it could be something that the Russians actually do.
Yep.
Because of sticking our nose into this whole thing with Ukraine now, I have no illusions that Russia is ever going to become any kind of free country. I largely think it's a lost cause, but it's another case where we're just the same way sticking our nose into the Middle East got us the World Trade Center.
Yep.
I don't know what's going to happen, but I also wonder too if. I don't think they'll roll over and play dead the way I don't know if the public will roll over and play dead the same way as they did before. I think they might be stirred up enough that they'll just be skeptical of anything.
I hope so. What they put up with, we'll see. I'm still a little bit. The thing that bothers me about this, and I know why objectivists and libertarians, some of them fell in for the COVID thing, because they still believed that what public health does is science and that it's objective, and it hasn't been for decades.
Oh yes.
And so they're like, well, this is objective data. Let me see the study. It's like, no, all of this information has been manipulated. Public health actually has been pushing a eugenics agenda. They never stopped. They just changed their marketing tactics. And so, so as a result of that, we have these food guidelines that are killing us. We have, we've made legal things like alcohol, tobacco, and things that, and children can get meth in the form of ADHD medication at the snap of a finger.
Yes.
But anything that might be, plant-based or change your perception of reality, they outlaw that. They have ill intent. They have a negative agenda. And I think a lot of people,
Fortunately, we all got through grade school before the fad of drugging kids became a fad. I've talked to some kids who were drugged as kids, and I see how it's impacted them long term, and I get so angry because it probably would have happened to me. If I'd come up in grade school or even the wonderful Catholic schools 20 years later, it's maybe I don't think my parents would have resisted it at all. Because they were just good citizens who went along with what they were told to do and didn't question it. And I don't know where we go from here. It's so many people who call themselves objectivists will just say, well, that's a conspiracy theory. Well, conspiracies are real. For example, like when Hulk Hogan said, you can't body slam Andre the Giant unless he helps you.
Yep.
Do you honestly think that studio wrestling is real? That's what I would say to anybody. It's not,
Well, I would say that is one thing that there was more reverence for institutions within the objectivist movement than is warranted. And again, so this goes back to Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. So yes, if you're an academic and you're reading Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, but you don't know what's happened with business since the 1950s, and you try to apply Rand's logic and description of the situation you're going to have a massive mismatch. You can't apply her view of General Electric from that book to General Electric today. It's not the same General Electric. It's not the same set of political circumstances. And you're right. They might say that these are conspiracy theories, but they're provable. In fact, this book, the first one, I go into the fact that it's the UN, the World Bank, the IMF, Bank of International Settlements, and I'm missing one of them. I think I said UN.
They don't even the World
WEF,
Economic.
the World Economic Forum.
Some of this stuff is out in the open. They don't even hide it necessarily that much anymore. Or things like the Bilderbergs. It was interesting. The Bilderberg conference was the exact same time as the Bitcoin conference. I found that. I wonder if that was a coincidence or not. But anyway, a lot of these groups, Council on Foreign Relations. Or the Christchurch call for that matter. There's a lot of these little consortiums. It's really scary to see, because you go back 100 or 50 years, the world was still somewhat divided, but now it just seems like it's this cabal of a bunch of worldwide tyrants who want to work together.
And they are. And what I put in the book is here's how they're working together, specifically with CBDCs. They hold events together. They put out policy papers. This disaster that just happened in Nigeria with CBDCs was courtesy of the IMF. The IMF implemented this. I was on a Twitter space with a guy last week who is in Nigeria, and he said this was a disaster. We had rioting. People couldn't get cash out of ATMs. People didn't understand. We don't have the technical infrastructure for CBDC. And he asked me, why did our government do this? I said, your government didn't do this. The IMF pushed this on them.
Well, yeah.
And so we're seeing that. And I outline this in the book where the UN, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals are being pushed through as part of how you use CBDC to reinforce these goals. It's not a theory. Like they put out policy documentation. And so, I hope objectivists, and again, I haven't really engaged the objectivist community, so I haven't been to an objectivist event. I just know when I was there, if anything, I would say maybe the biggest distance was an academic view of Rand's writings misapplied to current time, the current events. And if that carried forward, like I didn't know about the ARI stuff, but if they went full out on the COVID stuff, then that was it's an appeal to authority, and in an interesting way, but still a belief that what public health comes out with is actually objective data, which is also provably false, right? We know that 66% of scientific research can't be reproduced. We know that the editorial process in terms of what gets into Nature or what gets into these various publications, there's a complete mismatch in terms of, if Pfizer is doing a trial, if there are 100 trials done, they're going to publish 80% of the papers that are pro Pfizer and only 20% of the papers that are negative Pfizer. It's all filtered. It's all edited. It's all political, and it's not reproducible. And that's not objective evidence.
Yeah. So. And one of the problems, with the whole Corona thing is you had people making predictions, well, if we don't do this, something bad's going to happen. And I don't know if there is such a thing as objective predictions. I don't know how you can make predictions and not. I think your own personal biases will always creep into any kind of prediction you make.
Absolutely.
The predictions of what you're hoping will happen or the predictions of what you want to have happen. You can certainly look at data, but it also depends on which data are you paying attention to? Or which facts do you consider more important? For example, if you're going into a football game, well, you're just, there's a lot of things that some things are easy to predict, but some things aren't always easy to predict. And you certainly know that with, financial markets or things like that. It's like, I also think that some of these objectivists just bought into this because this was a chance for government to be the hero, and they wanted government to do something heroic. And so, it can do something heroic and stop the big bad virus, and that didn't work out. But I don't know where it is kind of scary. I think I definitely wish I definitely wish I'd gotten to learn more about getting out of the country. And I would certainly, if you can't, even if you don't leave, try to get a second passport just to be on the safe side. But who knows? Maybe that'll all be centralized too. It's hard to say.
Well, I can tell you it is absolutely the plan. Like, again, it's in the book, the plan to centralize all of that. And again, 2030 is the date, and the implementation. I mean, we've had New York City has had vaccine passports. There are multiple vaccine passport programs. Israel has a vaccine passport program. I've outlined some of these in the book, and there's definitely a movement towards centralization. So again, if you stop the money, if you stop their ability to centralize the money, then you can stop everything else. If you don't stop that and they can control the money, then you can't stop anything else, because there aren't many people that are going to resist when their bank account is frozen. There aren't many people that are going to continue to speak out and work outside of the system when their money's shut off. So
I think this is why some libertarians are probably going to places like Mexico, just because Mexico is a little bit more backward than we are. I mean, it's more like, say, living in America in 2005 or 2010. You still have a lot of people who use cash for everything and stuff like that. It's it's in some cases it's just where the state is kind of inept, and you can't really where the state just is too inept to try to do anything, and you can. If you want to make a cop go away, you give them 20. Not that we advocate for this, but people will, make a cop go away by giving them 20 pesos and it's over. So, but I don't know if, living in a place where bribes rule you might be better off living in a place where it's more based on bribery than where you have these people who are completely ideological and committed to their cause.
Well, that's true. Although I watched the HBO series on Anarchapulco. I don't know if you saw that. There was
yes, I saw that. I did a talk with Avi Esther about that. I've been to Anarchapulco twice, but
that was pretty shocking. That was shocking.
Well, part of the problem with that community is that there's a certain branch of people who are real train wrecks who get attracted to the liberty movement, and it seemed to attract the worst ones. I often said that it was started just so they could have a drug party, but I proposed that theory. But I did an interview with Avi Esther. She seems like a really nice lady. Well, this has been an outstanding talk. I think it's probably been one of my best. It's definitely one I want to get shared out there. I'm a little behind on my editing right now that I got to get things done. But do you have anything else you want to say before we go?
No, just that you can, reach me at Aaron R. Day on Twitter, and day2024.com is my website.
Yep. Yes, he's running for president for the Red Gang. Hopefully this will work out. He has run for office before. And I'm Chris Baker. Please follow my channel, like, subscribe, or follow the videos. We're on Odyssey, Rumble, and YouTube for now. And by the way, I've said negative things about Thiel. Rumble has not censored that, so good for them. If I can attack Peter Thiel on Rumble, that's a good sign. But I also have a novel called Escape from the Village. I'm Chris Baker, and we are out. Yes.
All right.